here today with the Point Clarke Lighthouse. We've just recently reopened after 5 years of being closed. The Point Clarke Lighthouse was built and started construction in 1855 and was completed in 1859. So it took about 4 years for them to build the Lightkeepers Museum, or the Lightkeepers House at the time, and the tower itself. And it took the whole final year of the construction project in 1859 was dedicated to where we are now, which is actually the ironworks at the top of the tower. It was there was French artisans that were sent over, and they were actually constructed the Fresnel lens that was the original second-order dioptric Fresnel lens, and the Copula ironworks around us right now. So you can see the Fresnel lens is gone, and this light that we're beside us right now isn't the original light, of course. It's the light that was recently installed in 2007. And down in the Lightkeepers Museum, we actually have the light that was installed in 1963. And that light is on display now, and it's interesting and it's different again. It's a two lens light as opposed to an 8 lens light that we see here now. And this light here is basically, it's a 100-watt bulb and a 12-volt bulb. And it's amazing that such a small bulb can produce such a massive amount of light to warn people about the shoal in Point Clarke. The shoal in Point Clarke actually stretches out about 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers. And the shoal is, it looks pretty calm out there right now. It's kind of a dull, dreary day, but the water is nice and flat. But what lurks underneath the water is a lot of rock, and it's very shallow. You can go out there about 4 or 5 kilometers, step off your boat, and literally step onto a large rock or boulder and not even get your knees wet. It's pretty shallow and dangerous, hence why the original lighthouse was put in place here, because of the rock shoal that stretches out into Lake Huron. Why the lighthouse was put here was in the 1800s, there was a lot of boat traffic, all the supplies. It was a supply route to getting to northern Ontario. And so at the time, the ships had to be warned about the shoal here, and so when the ships were coming up the coast of Lake Huron in Ontario, they would be able to see the lighthouse and be able to recognize that, to stay away from the shoal in Point Clarke. The harbor area here is essentially, it's a shallow harbor. It's meant for smaller boats, and essentially because of the shoal, the rock shoal. The Point Clarke Boat Club, they keep a channel open so that the small boats can get out into open water. And we're very fortunate here in 2015 that the water level has risen again in Lake Huron, and it's nice, and it's getting up to where our boaters can maybe feel a little bit safer out in the water and not worry about the propellers. The Point Clarke Lighthouse, the tower itself, it's amazing. The walls are actually about 5 feet thick at the base of the tower. So there's actually 2 walls. There's an outer wall and an inner wall at the base of the tower. And as they built the tower, there was the inner wall, all the leftover pieces of rock that were peeled off in order to make the blocks fit were actually put in the middle. So there's a rubble wall in the middle of the 2 walls. And as the tower goes up, the stone actually changes. The base of the tower is limestone. But once you get near the top, they were concerned that there was going to be single rows of rock that were going to support this heavy ironworks at the top. So the stone actually changed to granite. And so it's the granite stone that actually supports the ironworks at the top, and it becomes a single wall at the very top of the tower. The lighthouse was designated a National Historic Site in 1967. Really why Point Clarke was likely because of a few different things. It was the architecture of the lighthouse itself is just, it is really dramatic. You have to see it to believe it. The stone work, the iron work that was for the tower itself, that's really what made it a National Historic Site. And also the fact that it is a land-based lighthouse, so it's very accessible for people, for visitors to come and see, and that was likely part of the attraction for Parks Canada, designating it a National Historic Site.
Well, my grandfather was a lighthouse keeper here for a fair number of years, and he was John A. Campbell. And when he retired, there was a John C. Campbell came in right behind him. And I can remember basically on Sunday afternoons being down here, and people would want to go up in the lighthouse. So, as they say, you got the nickel tour, or maybe even up to 10 cents for an adult to go up, climb those 80-some steps to get up and have a look around. And it was quite a view. You could, at that time, there's no restrictions. You got outside on the balcony to walk around if you could, able to crawl out through the little hole that was there. So it was just a great experience.
I'm Bob Courtney, and I live at Point Clarke. Well, I'm 85 years old, and I lived there all my life. I lived just above the hill and farmed above the hill. My boys all farmed there. Well, Mr. Brown was the first one. He's built all the lighthouses on this lake in Georgian Bay in here. The one at Southampton is exactly the same as the one at Point Clarke, exactly the same. Well, it's all pine trees mostly where the lighthouse was built, and it got that name from pine. Before the lighthouse was built, they hung a lantern on a tall tree, and they had steps up to it, and it was just Pine Point then. But once these settlers come, they changed the name to Point Clarke, so that's how it got its name in the first place. Well, John Young came from Carlow, a little village east of Goderich, and him and Mr. Wright were the first two lighthouse keepers. One was a Tory and one was a Grit, and they fought steady all the time about it, so they flipped a coin to see which one of them had to go, and Mr. Young won, so the other fella left. And there's only been one lighthouse keeper at a time, only once. There was a Mr. Small for 6 months, while Mr. Young had an operation by the time he got going again. And he was there till 1894, and he retired to his son's farm, and the son had built a new house, and the old house, they lived in the old house. And his wife died about a month after he did, and that house was tore down then. But he didn't want his son to take the job at the lighthouse. He thought the wolves or the bears would get him. There was no population up there then, but he used to go to the back of the farm and he could see the lights circling around. He said, well, John's still living anyway. The wolves haven't got him yet. He kept track of him all the time was there. So.
One time there was a tennis court just outside the window here, and I can remember it. I don't think it was ever played on in my time, but it was just outside the window, and there was the outhouse there was as well, because, well, there was no indoor plumbing back then. So it was just an experience in itself being here back in, well, mid-40s, I guess you would say. One of the other incidents that happened, and I wouldn't advise it nowadays apparently, but because the light itself floated on a tub of mercury, there was always some stored down in one of the buildings. There was a storage shed down here, and always a little bit got spilled on the floor, and it was great fun trying to fish it out, get it out of the cracks in the floor, and gather it all up again. And sometimes you played around with it for a little while, but I don't know whether that would be advisable to do that nowadays or not.
Biggest thing was to go up. You had to go up 4 times a night. You had to go up at 5 o'clock to start it, and at 11 o'clock again, and at 3 o'clock, and then you went up in the morning to turn it off. And it was 364 turns to bring the weight from the bottom up to the top.
So you can see at the base of what the base of the lantern used to look like. So the Fresnel lens, it was a second order lens that would sat in a bath of mercury, and so it was like a clockworks here. So you can see with the pulleys down here that the chain works. It would go, they would reset. It was like a grandfather clock, but it'd have to be set twice a day, which is the neat part. So it would go up and down with the chain, and then it would rotate the light up top.
Remember riding down in the buggy from the farm at Amberley, where my grandfather would come up and help with the seeding or the harvest or whatever happened to be going on at the time. And I would ride down in the buggy and spend the night down here. And then he would quite often go back up the next morning and to help out Dad, help my father at the farm. I'd be in the neighborhood, maybe 6 or 7 years old at the time. But it was quite a drive. It was a great ride down in the buggy. Then there was a little barn where he used to keep the horse in here overnight, and we used to bring hay down in the at haying time and put a load or two into the barn. And that barn now is one of the cottages just across the road here from the Lighthouse. So it's been quite an experience for me as a kid growing up and being able to come down, climb the Lighthouse with your grandfather, go up there. I didn't go up in the middle of the night when he had to go up to wind it in the fall, but anyway, it was just a good feeling to be down here, and maybe that's why we bought a place and retired down here ourselves.
I'm sitting here today with Pierre Gambart from Public Works Canada, and we're trying to get a little background information on how we got to today. So I guess tell us a little bit of a story of how we got here today and where we're at today.
In late 2007, 2008, an assessment was conducted with Parks Canada and Public Works to come and take a look at the lighthouse. They looked at it from the ground, they did a walkabout, and they did a brief and rough condition assessment. They did recognize there's some work to do, and at that point it was left as is. And we showed up and we looked at it and we made sure that we could take off any chunks of stone which would be flying debris anyway down below. We were taking off chunks that were as big as this, and shards, very thin, almost like a hatchet size, kind of stuff. They could come down and it could penetrate and hurt people. Following a week or two, Public Works showed up, and at that point we deemed it unsafe for anybody in the local area. The best way to compare a damaged piece of stone is if you take an ice block, the old out of the freezer ice block, and you were to take a sledgehammer and you hit it. Just hit it once. You'll see all the ice now is all shattered. It's still in one piece, but it's all shattered. That's the kind of stone conditions we're encountering up there. And so we're trying to fix that, and that is a challenge. And so we can either replace some of the broken shards of ice or stone, or replace the whole block. And that's stone by stone condition we have to go through and evaluate. So that's where we're at. So the mortar conditions that were encountered once we had all the whitewash removed and the masons started cutting out the joints, we found that there was very little of the original mortar left, but it was full of new cement-based mortar, which had been put in over the last 30 years. So the mortar captured all the water, didn't let the water evaporate, and now we essentially started having a large stone wall full of water. And in winter it freezes, and ice expands, and we had some problems structurally speaking. So we stopped that construction project at that time, and we had to re-tender it all because now we came up with a solution to fill all the voids, and that was grouting. And so we made sure the existing contract, the contract was closed out fairly. We protected the lighthouse, and through the whole process of re-tendering, we were able to come back to construction a year later.
So, Steve, what can you tell us so far? How are things going with the restoration?
Well, it seems to be moving pretty good. We just started the grout work, injecting grout into the tower. Reason why we do that is to secure the tower and make sure we fill all the loose cavities inside the tower with ages and mortar deteriorating. This basically connects to like a bond inside the tower before we proceed with our mortar work and stone repair work on the facility. We normally have to wait 14 days before we proceed with that. We're getting at the stages now where we can start cutting some of the joints out and start moving up this tower.
So essentially, right now you're drilling holes through the outer course of block wall, and you're filling the interior with grout.
That is correct.
And so the grout, how does it able to flow?
It's almost like a liquid grout. It's pushed by pressure, air pressure. It runs at 10 pounds per square inch. And that way you don't put too much pressure onto the tower, and it just fills all the cavities. And you'll actually see it if there's holes in the tower on the inside. It'll eventually come out through there, and there's 2 guys in there at all times actually clogging up the holes. That way the leakage doesn't get out of hand inside. They did an actually really good job. Tower looks amazing inside, and it's coming along.
Excellent. So now we're coming into the stage where we're going to start doing some mortar work. So the mortar, that's basically what we're putting in between the blocks?
That's correct. That'll be the front phase. So we got to basically cut out the joints because they're old. Building's 160 years old, like everyone knows, and it needs to be done. We'll go in and we assess how much mortar to remove off of it. As we cut into them, we'll know if the mortar's debonded or it's like sand inside, then we'll remove more out of it and take it from those stages up.
So now what we have here is a project which has now a grouting component, and we have the same methodology for the stone repairs, and we have now completed the grout, and we're now into the stone repair part. And so we've taken out most of the original, the cementitious cement going back the last 30-40 years, and we start to repair and replace stones.
The Lighthouse restoration project has been underway for 4 years. It's now August of 2014. The stone to the left of the door is the largest stone that's been replaced in the tower. It's difficult to determine which stones are new and which stones are original to 1855. We've just recently reopened after 5 years of being closed. So we're quite proud of it, and we're quite pleased. Here in Kinloss, and in particular Point Clarke, it's a symbol of our community. It's something that everybody can identify with, and it's a part of our heritage.